Hi, everyone. Before we get into this episode, there's a few things that we'd like to say. First off, as always, we'd like to thank all of our patrons, including our executive producers, Mark Frost, Tony Turrin, and Justus Ebel, for supporting the show for so long. As well as that, we'd like to say that we've been away for a little while, and we do apologize for that. However, in the new year, we do plan on putting out episodes regularly again, and also plan on uploading some videos on our YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed to that, check out the link to it down in the description. So, thank you all for listening and supporting us through the past couple of years, and enjoy the episode. We had a lot of fun recording it, so we hope that you'll have a lot of fun listening. So, from History's Most, happy holidays, everyone. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of History's Most. My name is Peter.
And my name is Alex, and we have been away for a little while, haven't we? We've been doing a few different things. We started a YouTube channel, which has taken up probably more time, I think, than we were expecting to do both. It's also been quite a busy time for myself with different commitments, including the release of my new book, Hindenburg, Ludendorff, and Hitler. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But we are back, aren't we, Peter?
Yeah, we are. Filled with car sounds and all. um, and today we have a little bit of a different thing than we normally do. We are joined by Alex's brother and my friend Freddy Clifford.
Ooh.
And we're going to be telling some stories about some interesting places. I don't want to call them all. They're not all micronations, but they're these little islands, I guess, and the history of these little fascinating places. And I guess Alex, you have a story about a fascinating island in the middle of the Atlantic. In fact, it's one of the most remote islands on the planet Earth.
Yes, it is. It's actually, I believe, the most isolated settlement in the world. Yeah, with this episode, we just thought, we're going to come back, do something in the run up to Christmas, and do something a bit fun about, a topic that we're all kind of quite interested in. And ever since I first heard about it, I have been absolutely fascinated by the history of Tristan da Cunha, which is, as I said, the most isolated home to the most isolated settlement on the planet. Um, just to kind of put you in the picture, Tristan da Cunha is the most isolated place in the world. So where is it? It is a tiny, well, not that small, I suppose, 38 square miles, but a small volcanic island in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean. It's, and let me get these figures right, it's 1,732 miles from Cape Town, west, so to speak. It's kind of roughly level with the Cape. Um, it's 2,487 miles east of the Falkland Islands, and it's 1,514 miles south, roughly, of St. Helena, a very isolated um, Atlantic island, which, of course, is where Napoleon Bonaparte was imprisoned. But as you can probably imagine, there's not much, even though St. Helena is the closest to it. St. Helena itself is very isolated. So actually, if you want to get to Tristan da Cunha, you've got to get a boat from Cape Town. There's no airstrip, there's no helipad on this volcanic island. So it's even today, the quickest way of getting there is this 6-day boat journey.
Oh my God.
So you're basically a week's travel away from anywhere. Now, it's not like a microstate or a micronation because it's a British overseas territory, technically. It's part of the same governmental unit as St. Helena itself. So it's technically under the authority of the governor of St. Helena, but obviously they are 1,500 miles away. So its history hasn't really at all been connected really with St. Helena. It's been pretty, well, as you can imagine, pretty self-sufficient.
Pretty isolated, just like the island itself.
Right. And it took a long time actually for anyone to settle there. It's a volcanic island. It's very exposed. The Tristan da Cunha website, which the residents run, kind of explains that it was often ignored by early kind of colonist settlers because it doesn't have a natural harbour. It doesn't really have much in the way of kind of natural resources. But nevertheless, a small number of people carved out an existence there. So it was first discovered in the 16th century by a Portuguese explorer who named it after himself. Hence, it's kind of a quite exotic sounding name, Tristan da Cunha. And actually, Tristan da Cunha is made up of the actual island of Tristan da Cunha and then an archipelago spread over about 20 miles, I think, of smaller islands as well. There's Gough Island, Nightingale Island. There's the brilliantly named Inaccessible Island. All of those are uninhabited. I think there's a weather station on one of those, but Tristan da Cunha, or Tristan, is the kind of main island. Now, it was discovered in the 16th century, but for hundreds of years after that, no one settled there for the reasons I've kind of pointed out, and not least because it's so far from anywhere at all. The Dutch surveyed it, the French, the British. The first kind of settlement that was permanently established properly wasn't until 1810 when three Americans, later joined by a fourth, set up camp there. Their leader was a guy called Jonathan Lambert, and he declared that the islands were his property and he named them the Islands of Refreshment. I'm not 100% sure why. Within a couple of years, however, three of the four men, including Lambert, had died.
Oh,
So one of them stayed
refreshing.
on his own, presumably just subsistence farming and fishing. And in 1816, the British annexed the islands. And actually, the reason for it was, like I say, that there isn't really much in terms of, it's too really far away from anything to be a good staging post. It's not got any particular resources other than, fish, lobsters, and some quite kind of unique wildlife that's obviously pretty unique to these islands. But the reason the British decided in 1816 to stake their claim was that Napoleon had just been imprisoned on St. Helena. And he'd already escaped from one island
So
to try and reclaim the French throne.
they wanted to keep an eye on him.
Right, they thought, let's not leave these vacant islands still 1,500 miles away, but let's make sure that these are under our control. So by 1824, there was a population of 22 men and 3 women. But in the 19th century, ironically, the islands actually became more rather than less isolated. And there was kind of less and less ships visiting there because 2 reasons, really. The opening of the Suez Canal, meaning less ships had to go around the Cape, and the introduction of steam power, meaning less voyages needed stop-off points at irregular kind of intervals. There was one visitor of note in 1867. The then Duke of Edinburgh, Queen Victoria's second son, visited, and the settlement, the settlement, there is only one settlement on Tristan da Cunha, was renamed in his honor. Edinburgh of the Seven Seas,
That is a fantastic
um,
name.
which is a fantastic name, and it's what it's called to this day. You can obviously, there's loads of pictures of, and it is a very dramatic place, to some extent, quite desolate. There isn't, it is quite exposed. But it's a remarkable place, this Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, and it's what a name, like you say. Now, about the 1870s, the population had grown to 88 people, but it's obviously a really difficult, dangerous, and isolated spot, right?
Yeah.
Um, it'd be a very hard life for these settlers, and most of them, well, the vast majority of them, were simply descendants of the original handful. Because it wasn't attracting many people there, and people who lived there in this very, very isolated community tended to stay. So you can actually go through on the Tristan da Cunha website, and it remains to this day, that the community, there's certain surnames that are basically predominate, and they have a list of their, they kind of have like a census on their website,
Mm-hmm.
and it lists the number of people with each kind of name. So there's 242 today, and 63 of those people have the surname Green. 40 of them have the surname Glass. So obviously these are the kind of original settler families.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, interestingly, over the years been some Italians, the Repettos, and there's 41 of them. Lavarellos, there's 12 of them. So you can imagine it's a really kind of isolated community that has grown up, kind of in the 19th century, and as we'll see into the 20th, completely cut off, really. A ship
Mm-hmm.
might visit every few years, but they're basically self-sufficient.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing that they've been isolated for so long that they actually have their own unique dialect of English as well.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I haven't heard it, but I think they pretty much, have an accent that is obviously related to, the British
Mm-hmm.
accent, but has some South African influence as well. Has picked up words, I think, from some of the Italian settlers too, or kind of linguistic aspects. So I'm sure it is very unique, and an illustration, by the way, of how difficult and dangerous the world was for these settlers. In 1885, the worst disaster that hit the island, 15 men died in a lifeboat that had gone out to meet an Australian ship. So if the population's, around about 90 at that time,
Oh my
that's
God, yeah, yeah. That's a sizable percentage. It's
very
notable.
high percentage, yeah. So it was so difficult life out there that actually in 1907 the British government offered to evacuate the inhabitants, and give up on having this island settled. Not that I think the British government actually, had much to do with the island other
Mm-hmm.
than claiming it legally. Um, but the Tristanians, as I believe they're called, refused. And just to highlight this, actually increasing isolation in as the kind of 20th century dawned, not a single ship stopped at the island between 1909 and 1919. So 10 years without any contact whatsoever with the outside
So they're
world.
just completely self-sufficient on their own supplies for those
Well,
10
yeah,
years. Wow.
the people do a mixture of subsistence farming and fishing. Um, and so they completely support themselves. And in 1919, HMS Yarmouth stopped at Tristan at Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, and they told the islanders, that the First World War was over. But of course, they had
They had
had
no
no idea
context. Yeah,
that there had been a war at all. So the population over time was growing very, very gradually. By the 30s, it was 167. But actually, it was the Second World War which really brought considerable, I guess, kind of infrastructure and investment to the island for the first time.
Mm.
And that's because the Royal Navy decided to use it as a signals intelligence station, basically to detect U-boats, signals that they were sending from the Atlantic. Now, because obviously, I'm sure it was a fairly small station, but in order to set that up and to have the personnel and everything, there needed to be some infrastructure put in place. And that's when the hospital, a school was built, and remarkably, when a cash-based general store was built as well, presumably for the servicemen to spend their wages in. But it kind of dawns on you at that point that presumably cash, a money-based economy, had played very little role
Yeah.
because these people were self-sufficient,
Yeah,
and
and
because they carried out subsistence farming and fishing.
there aren't that many goods to buy, all things considered.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you've only got a ship stopping once every 10
Yeah.
years, there's not really stuff to buy. Um, a few years after the war, a fish canning factory was built, which was kind of the first um, deviation into kind of this kind of industrial revolution coming to Tristan. And one of the remarkable things is that there wasn't actually a British official put in place on Tristan until 1950.
Right.
Sir Hugh Elliot was the very first administrator of the island. So until that point, it had been entirely kind of self-run. Just settlers there had conducted their own affairs.
Mm.
In 1957, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip, visited. Possibly, I'm guessing, because of the link to Edinburgh of the Seven
Yeah.
Seas and the 19th century Duke of Edinburgh. But I want to talk a bit about what happened in October 1961 and afterwards. This, for me, is one of the most interesting stories relating to Tristan da Cunha. As I've mentioned a few times, it is a volcanic island. The mountain, the volcano, is called Queen Mary's Peak. And in 1961, there was a serious eruption. A series of landslides had been taking place in the days and weeks leading up to it. And there was an earthquake. So obviously there was, seismic activity going on. The people, the residents at that time, there was 264 islanders, and they all got together with the administrator in the hall. There is only one hall; it's one settlement,
Mm.
and they decided they need to evacuate. It
So,
was a pretty kind of dramatic scene because apparently the ground, like a fissure in the ground, um, opened up between the settlement and the canning factory.
oh,
So they knew they needed to get out, and there was a volcanic eruption that destroyed that factory from this fissure.
the end of the Industrial Revolution.
Well, yeah, I mean, pretty serious stuff. So they got into just fishing boats. They piled in to open boats. I mean, you can imagine how terrifying this must have been, how isolated they were. And they crossed to one of the other islands. I think it was Nightingale Island,
Mm.
to basically escape the volcanic eruption. Now, luckily, a Dutch passenger ship was on the way to Tristan da Cunha to pick up two women who were about to go off to the mainland to train as nurses. So this Dutch liner arrives and picks up, fortunately saves the islanders. They take them back to Cape Town. and they are transferred to a British ship that sails them to England, where they arrive in November. So you can imagine these people, the vast majority of whom have never left
Yeah.
the island,
The-
who live on.
I mean, yeah, I can see already they're going to a a big country with cities.
The kind of culture shock is impossible to imagine.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the islanders will have lived their whole life on the island, as will all of their descendants. Sorry, all of their predecessors. They've lived in this tiny community of 200 people their whole lives. Edinburgh of the Seven Seas only has one two-story building, the government building, which the administrator is based in. They're a week's travel away from anywhere. They're in obviously an island in the South Atlantic, a very very unique lifestyle. And suddenly they arrive in the UK in 1961. Not to mention, obviously, the circumstances which they've arrived
Oh
is
yeah,
quite,
quite shocking,
yeah, I
distressing.
mean, distressing, dislocating. Um, Now, the British government, assumed that this would be, a permanent evacuation, especially if the settlement had been destroyed. It was hardly likely that the British in 1961 were going to be looking at recolonizing Tristan da Cunha.
Hmm.
But obviously, there was then the issue of what to do with the island community. They were put up in briefly a camp in Surrey in southern England, and then they were settled in a former RAF camp in Hampshire. Um, about 50 houses along a single road. And suddenly, they are part of they're part of British life. The children were going to school.
Hmm.
The adults had to find work in just local businesses. But as you can imagine, they were quite kind of like fish out of water. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It must have been a very strange experience. They didn't have immunity from flu that has built up among
Oh, that's a good.
the
Yeah, that's something that didn't occur to me. Disease.
exactly. So I think they found that quite tough. It tells us on the Tristan website, as they recount the islanders themselves, the story, that a pensioner was mugged. And the fact that's worthy of note, I guess it must be because crime must be, near enough non-existent,
Yeah.
given that it's a tiny community of 200 people where they are isolated, where, there wasn't until mid 20th century really a cash-based economy. And also the winter in Britain of 1962-3 was a very, very bad winter. And Tristan da Cunha, for all its isolation and I'm sure it gets a lot of rain and winds, it's rather temperate climate-wise, I
Hmm.
believe. Not tropical by any means, but it was probably a shock. So the following year, 1962, there was an expedition that was going to survey the volcano and everything like this. And this survey found that the settlement, contrary to all expectations, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas was still standing.
Mm.
And the islanders, when they heard this, basically, made it clear that they wanted to return. Um, a first group of 12 islanders went off in order to make it habitable again, and basically prepare things for a return. The British Colonial Office, which technically had responsibility for Tristan da Cunha, wasn't particularly enthusiastic about resettling the island. They held a vote in December 1962, and the community voted 148 to 5 in favour of returning.
Wow.
So in 1963, they sailed from Southampton, and as it says on Tristan's website, the miracle was complete. Most of the world's most isolated community had returned to their volcano-ravaged settlement, rejecting the. Well, I don't know. I presume no one was forced. But then again, it does say the main resettlement group of 198 islanders left Southampton, on top of several advanced parties. So perhaps they took the decision as a whole. Those outvoted decided to accept the decision.
Okay.
I don't know the answer though. So more or less, that takes us to the present day. I just think it's absolutely fascinating that this community decided to return and kind of reject the modern world, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, well, I guess when you're that isolated for that long, I mean, that's the only thing that you know, and with the exception of 5 people, I guess most of them were comfortable with what they knew, as I guess anybody would be.
And I think part of it is that it must be such a different existence. One of the things I didn't mention is that no one owns any land on Tristan da Cunha. It's all kind of collective. Today there's 242 residents, and so they are all engaged in subsistence farming. A few people working at different things. And a lot of them fishing. There's a particular lobster that's unique that they sell to the outside world. They also, by the way, one of their big industries is stamps. The Tristan da Cunha stamps, which I can imagine are very seldom used to send things to other islanders, given there is only one settlement. But they seem to sell them to stamp collectors, as far as I can tell.
That's like
because they are
the holy grail for stamp collectors. Get me a
right. As I said, the government building that the administrator, who is a British Foreign Office official who goes out there for a term, is the only 2-story building. There's no mobile phone reception today.
Does it have internet?
As far as I can find out, the only building that has internet is the government building, which has an internet cafe for islanders to use. They do get television broadcast using the British Armed Forces Network, so they get British television. They obviously were pretty isolated during the COVID pandemic when the boats stopped coming. And they were quite worried about it because they have their hospital built in the Second World War, but it only has 2 beds.
Right, so they couldn't
a couple
afford
of resident nurses and a doctor.
Yeah.
They have 1 police, proper permanent police officer.
It'd be Conrad Glass with an MBE.
Is it possibly? They have the administrator, like I said, who is a British official, and he kind of is also the magistrate, the one kind of judge on the island. And he also sits on the island council, which is partly elected, which is, I believe, 12 leading islanders who, together with the administrator, kind of make the decisions. So I imagine it remains, despite the increased connectivity with the outside world, it's still, pretty much a week's travel from anywhere. So I imagine it does remain a very interesting place that is still. I imagine the residents would probably still choose the same thing if they were faced with a choice today, because their life is so different.
It's Yeah, imagine living in a place that literally does not have COVID.
Well, yeah, maybe we should all be jealous of Tristan da Cunha
Yeah.
now. But yeah, I think it's just a really kind of fascinating story, and I think, like I say, particularly that episode in the '60s of it. I think it tells you a lot about what it, how different it must be
Doesn't
to live in one of these communities.
Before COVID, obviously, did it have any kind of tourism, not industry, but was there any? Was it a particular spot that some people would want to go to?
It does have a very small scale tourist industry, I believe. Obviously, the limitation is on the number of people who would go because it's so isolated.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
mean,
an
I
easy
I
place to get
imagine a
to.
lot of people haven't even heard of Tristan da Cunha, so
Well, yeah, and I think the boats to and from South Africa are every 6 weeks or so.
yeah.
It's not a regular, um, it's not a regular daily kind of service that's put on. Um, and I suppose that there is obviously a lot of um, wildlife and the mountain itself.
Mhm.
There is also, I believe, a 9-hole golf course, which I
Oh,
imagine is quite challenging. Um, but there is a bar, the Albatross. So I think it would take a certain type of tourist to take
yeah.
on the trip itself and to commit themselves to obviously quite a lengthy stay.
Well, if
Well, the tourism board might be in a bit of jeopardy now because they lost their former tourism director. Uh, they've moved to the Isle of Man.
Oh wow!
A
Well,
story here. The Repetto family got stranded in the UK after lockdown. They were visiting the UK, and when the coronavirus pandemic suddenly began, and they weren't allowed to leave, and they were trapped there for a number of months until eventually they were allowed to move to the Isle of Man, where they've decided they'll stay permanently.
wow.
So
from one
yeah.
island to another.
They say, think the Isle of Man is a better place.
Oh, well, certainly here at History's Most, we're not going to necessarily endorse that position. Um, but no, it is a unique place, obviously, that lives almost by its own rules. I believe, the men who are fishermen, who is a very large amount of the population, there is a big gong or a bell every morning which announces whether the seas are calm and therefore whether they're going to go out fishing and things that day. So
Mm.
it feels like it's something from a bygone age. People living by the kind of the weather and the seasons and things like this.
And if you ever look at a picture of the island, it is actually quite a beautiful island because it's very stark. There's this, little town at the base of this volcano, and it just towers over this settlement.
I
Um,
have to say, the resemblance from Edinburgh, the Seven Seas, to the actual Edinburgh is pretty uncanny. They're,
uh, it's very quite similar, I assume.
Well, if I've sold Tristan to you with this story, then I believe the website, which is tristandc.com, which has everything you could ever really want to know about Tristan da Cunha, right down to birthdays and things like this. Also has a section on job opportunities.
oh,
Um, Currently non-listed at this time, but a job vacancy for a social worker closed on the 1st of October this year. Um, there's marine management, data managers, occupational therapists, education advisor, English
what's the
teacher,
pay like?
2019. Um, I'm not sure, but all I'm saying is that now and again opportunities come up to sample that unique life.
Who knows? One of our
Wow.
listeners might be might be the next Tristan da Cunha resident. Keep your eyes posted on that job board, people.
So, from the world's most isolated settlement, who can top that?
Well, this isn't the world's most isolated settlement, but I'm going to bring forward to the table the least populous national jurisdiction in the world.
Okay.
This is the Pitcairn Islands. It is a very isolated island in the Pacific Ocean, and it has a population in 2021 of 47 people.
Wow.
Now,
That makes the Tristan look like it's a bustling metropolis.
That makes Edinburgh the Seven Seas look like the actual Edinburgh.
Well, I suspect of the islands and micro nations, if you can call them that we're going to talk about today, this is probably the most famous because of the sort of circumstances surrounding its establishment. There have been films made about this. So basically, all people living on the Pitcairn Islands today, all 47 of them, are descendants of a naval mutiny which occurred in 1789. It was the HMS Bounty. Like I said, it's
Yes.
quite a well-known story. So essentially, what happened was in 1789. Well, actually, in 1787, the Bounty set off Tahiti to the West Indies to transport breadfruit plants.
No, I know bread.
It's a pretty. It's the stakes are high here, and they'd had a 5-month sort of stay in the crew of 44 had a 5-month stay in Tahiti, during which time they'd become quite sort of accustomed to the sort of paradise. I mean, they had taken sort of wives unofficially, sort of local Polynesian women, and they'd become quite attached to the way of life there, quite carefree, especially compared to life in the Navy. So when it came time to set sail and back to duty, they took with them some of their Polynesian brides, and but they struggled to adjust to the sort of harsh realities of life at sea, especially under the captain, William Bligh, who, as legend has it, was sort of very overbearing and strict, and dished out a lot of harsh punishments. And
You're saying he was no Lucky Jack from Master and Commander?
No, it's the relationship between the crew and the captain here was it seems to be very much at odds with one another. They were there was a lot of tension brewing, especially between one of the captain's seconds, Lieutenant Fletcher Christian, who was sort of beginning to, I suppose, rebel against Captain Bligh's authority. And he came under a lot of, well, he took the brunt of the punishment that was being dished out.
Right.
And on the 28th of April, 1789, he finally decided that he had enough. And he led a mutiny against Captain Bligh. So basically, of the 44 crew, only 18 of them sided with Bligh, which gives you sort of idea of how unpopular he was. And Lieutenant Christian took the loyalists and sent them aboard a lifeboat and just sent them adrift in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. which was
Do we know what
sort of a
happened to
death
them?
sentence.
Do they die?
Amazingly, no. Amazingly, Bly managed to navigate the lifeboat 6,000 kilometers
What?
to back.
What?
What?
Yeah, 4,000 miles.
How? How?
Um, Amazingly, I don't know. I don't know how they managed to survive. But survived. Him and the loyalists managed to make it back to Tahiti. Whereupon they notified the authorities. Then, however, Fletcher Christian had sailed off to his new home,
Ah, yes.
Pitcairn Islands,
Ah, yes.
to a completely sort of the completely isolated island with no nothing going on.
Were there
And it was their
any
new paradise.
natives? Was it just
It was
completely abandoned?
yeah, and this was their new paradise. It was
So is it in the South Pacific?
yeah. It's I think I don't exactly know where on the map where the closest settlement is. I think it is Tahiti. I think it's also quite near. I mean, we're talking obviously, thousands of miles. That's what constitutes quite near. But it's basically east of New Zealand, and
Right.
so it's a long way from
Oh,
civilization.
I have a map on my wall. I see it. Oh my man, yeah,
So
yeah.
it took Bly a year to get back to England. Um, and that's when the Royal Navy dispatched another ship to basically follow up on this and track down Fletcher Christian. But as I say, the mutineers had basically made the Pitcairn Islands their home now, and that's where they were going to stay, I guess, for the rest of their lives. Which I wonder, whether by then uh, any regret had set in. Um, but yeah, so we don't really know exactly what happened on the island after that, because by the time um, the Navy reached the Pitcairn Islands to follow up on this, uh, Fletcher Christian was dead,
Oh,
and there were conflicting stories over what had happened to him. So uh, basically, they were relying on the oral accounts of some of the surviving mutineers um, to kind of establish the sort of history of what happened. What it sounds like is that mutineers had sort of broken down into sort of factionalism
mm.
and started to kill each other off.
And the people who live there today, are the descendants of those mutineers. Then.
Yes. So, Richard Christian had a son with a Polynesian woman, and his son was called Thursday October Christian, after the fact that he was born apparently on a Thursday in October. So apparently his name was rectified in 1814 to Friday October Christian after they worked out they got it wrong.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, I mean there's a long line of like how on Tristan da Cunha there's dominant sort of surnames that have been passed down through the generations like Glass and Green. The Pitcairn Islands is really just the Christians and I'm not really entirely sure who else. There are others. um, the Christians are like sort of the patriarchal family, I think, and sort of have historically held leadership positions of the sort of government of the island. You can call it a government. But I suppose, yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about the sort of modern day state of the Pitcairn Islands, it's tiny. It has one settlement called Adamstown, which is where everybody lives. I'm not aware that. I mean, they've got a church, and I think that they have a bar. I don't think there's any kind of um, law enforcement or any kind of emergency services or anything like that. I mean, like I say, the population currently is 47. In the past, it was larger, but it's never had a population that's exceeded about 200.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, what do you want to know? It's there's not much going on.
So it's a what do you want to call it? It's a British territory, right?
Yes, it's a sort of overseas, yeah, it's a British overseas
But
territory.
it doesn't have like a like Tristan da Cunha. It doesn't have a uh what would you
I don't
call
think
it?
it has a governor.
A governor?
No,
No.
Administrator.
it doesn't have a governor as oh, actually, yes, it does have a governor. Um, but it doesn't have a dedicated governor just for the Pitcairn Islands.
Oh, so he's in charge of a bunch
The
of
governor of the
different.
Pitcairn Islands is the High Commissioner to New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
So it's sort of like a shared role because the Pitcairn Islands, like I say, is quite relatively close to New
Yeah,
Zealand,
yeah,
and it uses New Zealand currency, and although there has apparently been an attempt to launch a Pitcairn Island dollar, which I believe you can find pictures of, and there's a picture of Fletcher Christian, who is that sort of founding, you know, um, he's their founder and sort of national hero.
yeah.
National hero. Um, and yeah, so they basically rely on the New Zealand dollar for their currency.
What I
I
want to know is when the Royal Navy finally got there, obviously Christian was dead. They'd been there quite a few years, it seems. But they just let everyone stay, these mutineers.
they took some of them back. Some of them were arrested and taken back, but then the ship that was taking them back got caught in a reef and sank, and a lot of them died. Um, uh, but no, a lot of them, most of them, I think, just, stayed. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty unusual situation. I mean,
Well, unique, I guess.
yeah, I mean, it is incredibly, bizarre because the population of this island are, you know, not exactly settlers and not exactly native.
Yeah.
Uh, a blend of Polynesian natives and Navy, sailors, British sailors. So it's a very unusual sort of like demographic. Um,
What's the telecommunications situation like on the Pitcairn Islands in the modern day?
I believe they do have phone access. I think they use the New Zealand like phone code. What do you call it? Like
Oh, like the
uh,
extension or
Oh, I mean like the dialing code,
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
the,
yeah.
lo- the local sort of. So they do have telephone access. I don't know about internet. Maybe they have internet access. Well, actually, they must do because they have a website.
Oh,
They
okay.
have their own domain .pn.
That's
So they must have internet access. Have the website doesn't look like it's been updated in quite a while. So
mm,
I don't know, how often Pitcaners are, browsing browsing the web. I don't know.
sounds to me like they got to catch up with Tristan da Cunha. They're falling behind in the technological race.
I think maybe they have a little bit of a head up over Tristan Zacuna because with the Tristan Zacuna, I mean, they can't really uh access. I mean, the internet access there is very slow, isn't it? I mean,
I would imagine so.
Probably. They
um,
do have satellite. Well, certainly the
oh,
government uses satellite phones to communicate. Well, from the world's most isolated nation or settlement to possibly the most bizarre one in terms of its origins,
oh,
Peter, how can you top that?
Well, so yeah, Pitcairn Islands has what 47 people living on it. Well,
47.
we'll go from that to a settlement which, according to its founder, the population is normally, quote, like two. This is
That's low.
a relatively well known story. I think, quite a lot of
Yeah,
people
I
know
think
about it.
is it. Would you say that for the younger generation, this is more well known than the Pitcairn Islands?
Yeah, I would probably say so. Um, Although certainly maybe the HMS, the story of the bounty, is quite well known
The
because
story
there
of
has
Mutiny
been
is very
films been
famous,
made
but I
about it.
think it's gradually fading from
Yeah.
public consciousness as they haven't made a film about it since about the 80s, I think.
Okay.
Obviously, everybody knows that, the only way to keep things in the public consciousness is make films about them. So,
Hollywood, get on that. You guys are making reboots all the time now. Let's have a Mutiny on the Bounty remake. So anyway, this is the story of Sealand. Now, for a little bit of background, Sealand is a sea fort that was built in the 40s during the war in the Thames estuary. It is about 12 kilometers off the coast of Essex. Now, there were a bunch of these sea forts. They were designed by a guy called, I don't remember his name, but it's Monsell, basically. They're called the Monsell Sea Forts. And there's about, I think, 5 or 6 of these things in the Thames estuary. And this is the story of one of them, Fort Ruffs, which if you want to look up a picture, it's basically it kind of looks like an oil platform. It has these two concrete pillars which stick up about 60 feet out of the water, and on top of that, there's a flat platform which has a very tiny building on it and a helicopter pad on top of that. And during the war, these things were used to shoot down. They're anti-aircraft guns, and they were also used to protect against submarines. And during the war, Fort Ruffs and other forts like it had, I think, maybe 200 people living on it during it. So this is a platform which has a very small square footage, and you have 200 people living in there. And these concrete pillars that I mentioned earlier, you can go down inside of them, and you can go down to the bottom, and it's resting on the sea floor, basically. And this is where the soldiers would live and stay. So obviously, it'd be, quite cramped. You're sharing this tiny little fort with 200 other people. But anyway, after the end of the war, there was no more use for these things. So I think in 1940, I want to say 46, the British military took the soldiers off, and these things basically were just left to rot for about 2 decades. But then something happened. The BBC in the 1960s was a little bit behind the times when it came to the popular music of the day. See, during the day, they would not play rock and roll. They would only play rock and roll late at night. And young people, being hip and with the times, they wanted to listen to some rock and roll, you know, they wanted to listen to the Stones. And so the remedy to this was pirate radio, which is a whole deep conversation to get into. Pirate radio is so fascinating to me because it's basically just these people that would say, I don't like the music that they're playing on national radio. Let's buy a ship, moor it off, you know, in either territorial or international waters, and play some music. Let's get some. We get, you know, DJs on this ship. They go in, get their records, go off, and just play it all the time. Illegally, of course. Hence the name pirate. um, so
Oh, I thought pirate was because they were sailing the seas.
well, it's yeah, but also I think there were pirate radios based in the UK, like actually territorial, but they get shut down very quickly because it is illegal. So anyway, the next phase of this story, enter a man named Roy Bates. Now, Roy Bates, or Patty Roy Bates, sorry, um, Roy Bates was a very storied man already. He had served in the Spanish Civil War, and I was originally under the impression that he fought for the Republicans. However, then according to himself, he said he, quote, fought on both sides, which I'm not really
Oh dear.
not really sure what that means. I think
I wonder
think-
whether there's a bit of storytelling going on here
It-
about somebody's past. But anyway, let's not. I'm not
yeah.
committing to that. Let's not give the lawyers a hard time.
Yeah. So anyway, he also served in World War II. He fought at the Battle of Monte Cassino, and came back home to Britain, and you know, did some things here and there. However, eventually, he saw this pirate radio business start to pop up, and he thought this might be a good opportunity to make some money, and so he, as you do, because I think he already owned a boat because he lived in Essex, I believe, at the time, and he decided, I'm going to go out to one of those sea forts, and I'm going to set up my own radio station, as you do. So he went to, well, he didn't originally go to Fort Ruffs. He originally went to Fort Knock John, I believe. And Fort Knock John, he had visited originally and seen it up close, and it was completely abandoned. However, he went back the second time after he had the radio station idea, and there were already people there with the same idea trying to set it up. However, what he did was he walked onto the fort and said, we mean to stay on Fort Knock. He basically accosted these people and threw them off and said, we mean to stay on Knock John. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And then he took them back to shore, which was a pretty stand-up move. He didn't just like let them, you know, hang out there. Amazingly,
Christian, on a boat.
Amazingly, this happens a lot. Like, throughout this story, we're gonna hear more about, you know, taking these forts. These forts get taken and recaptured and captured and recaptured again and again. And amazingly, as far as I know, no one's ever been injured or died as a result of one of these takings. They're always very civil. So he sets up his own radio station called Radio Essex, which was the first 24-hour pirate radio station. They had about 15 DJs who would get ferried out to this sea fort in the middle of the water, and just back and forth. Apparently, the Rolling Stones visited, allegedly. Not too sure on that, but I assume that's coming from Roy Bates, which well, let's not get into that. So anyway, Fort Ruffs, or sorry, not Fort Ruffs, Knock John. It is still in territorial British waters. It apparently at the time of what counted as British territorial waters was allegedly how far a cannon could shoot off the coast of England. And it was, I think there was a boundary of about, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 miles, right? So Knock John was still in territorial waters. So there was legal issues. The government got on him quite a lot. You know, he had to pay fines. And he said, well, enough with this. I'm going to move to Fort Ruffs, which was, at the time, during the war, it was built in international waters. And apparently no one noticed or cared. So they just they just built this thing in international waters. And so Roy Bates said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to set up my own radio station there instead. We're going to change the name to something else. And there was, again, already people on Fort Ruffs. And apparently on Christmas Day, he went to Fort Ruffs with his son Michael, who will play a bigger role in this story as time goes on, with some iron bars. They climbed up the Fort Ruffs and just came in, apparently as they were cutting the turkey, and said, "We're taking this thing. Get out." So
I didn't realize it was such a savage world.
In pirate radio.
Yeah, it's so ruthless.
Yeah. Well, so he started up his radio station. However, the legal issues still never really went away. And he also started to get a little bit more ambitious around this time. And he was also quite disheartened. He felt that the British government didn't enable citizens to take the initiative as much as they used to. So he was feeling disheartened about the government. And he also wanted to start expanding this sea fort. He wanted to, he got some ideas. He wanted to, I don't know, maybe add an extension or two, and maybe put some other commercial purposes on it. However, the government is not going to let him do that unless you start your own nation. You can't be bossed around by the government when you are the government.
It's the solution to every daily problem.
And so, the Principality of Sealand was born. It was on Roy's wife, whose name was Joan, Roy's wife's birthday. They all gathered around here. It was a bunch of people. It was him, their son and daughter, and a bunch of the people that they had worked with previously to help recapture these forts, and people who had worked with them. And they raised this flag. And they'd also hired, well, not hired, but a newspaper had paid them for the story of the founding of the Principality of Sealand. And they got a helicopter out, and I think there's pictures. I think you can see this. And they raised this tricolor flag, red for Roy, black for pirate radio, and white for the path of purity that they endeavor to walk.
Of course, yeah.
In what capacity? In what capacity were they walking a path of purity?
I think pirate radio and purity, they go hand in hand, don't they?
Well, and they also gave a motto. I'm not brushed up on my Latin, so I'm probably going to butcher this, but "A mare libertas," which means "from the sea, freedom." Now, we move on to the next phase of the story. In 1968, the Principality of Sealand was chugging along. I mean, obviously there was quite a lot of issues. I mean, it is a by this point in time, it's a 20-year-old fort, 25-year-old fort that, has been sitting there in seawater. So it's rusting away. It's, it takes a lot of cleaning up.
Can I just ask you, did they got UN recognition by this point?
Not by this point, but just okay. No, I'm leading you on. They don't have UN recognition. However, there is some more stuff about this. So just in fact, this is actually part of what we're going to lead into here. In 1968, there was a buoy which was being worked on, which is within, it's less than a mile away from Sealand. You can see it from Sealand. And Michael Bates, Roy's son, stepped out onto the platform, fired a pistol as a warning shot into the water to say, "You're in Sealand's territorial waters, back off." And this was not the best decision, I'm going to say, because they did end up having to go to court on firearms charges and a couple other charges, I think. However, it all ended up working out pretty well for them because the court ruled that legally speaking, they couldn't be prosecuted. Because even though they were British subjects, they were in international waters at the time that the crime was committed. They couldn't do anything about it. Which, I mean, that would embolden me to say, well, looks like this actually worked out pretty well.
And is there any authorities that have a say over international waters?
There probably is now, but but that's irrelevant because they actually extended the area, the borders for British territorial waters. So now Sealand is within those borders, but yeah. But I don't know about at the time. I guess not, because they just let this happen. Now, emboldened with this newfound, this confirmation that the British government really can't do much about this. Bates got in contact with a man named Alexander Achenbach, who was a German former diamond dealer and philanthropist, who I believe it was Achenbach who approached Bates. I'm not too sure on that. About expansion plans for Sealand. And Achenbach had some hell of a plans. He wanted to build a building adjacent to Sealand with a hotel, a casino, duty-free shop, post office, a bank, restaurant, apartments, the whole 9 yards.
Sealand, the new Las Vegas.
The libertarian paradise. And Bates apparently went along with this for quite some time, because he actually made him the foreign minister of Sealand. And when you're foreign minister of Sealand, you get a passport, you get everything. And you also get to help write the Constitution of Sealand. And they came up with an anthem. They came up with currency too, the Sealand dollar, which has a picture of Roy's wife on it. And Achenbach really wanted to go along with this idea. Like he really wanted to make Sealand the big thing. Like he wanted this libertarian paradise to come true. And so he helped write this constitution. He sent it to 150 or so nations all around the world, trying to get it ratified. Of course, none of them would go for it. And I think a Belgian court said that because it's a man-made structure and you don't have any population, you have 5 people that live there. You can't be a country, which to me just seems like the man keeping people down. But apparently something happened between Achenbach and Roy Bates, because I guess Achenbach felt that Roy Bates was not playing ball enough, and he didn't feel that he was committed enough to this idea of wanting to build this casino and all this lavish stuff. And so you do what any natural thing, what comes to you in this situation. Do you talk about it? Do you break it off? Or do you hire a bunch of Dutch mercenaries to kidnap the crown prince?
I think you go for that option.
So they basically, this Alexander Achenbach character, he sent a team of, I'm not sure how many people it was, probably only 3 or 4, which consisted of Dutch mercenaries and I believe a German man called Gernot Putz, who they landed on Sealand. Now Roy Bates himself was actually lured away under the pretense of a business meeting in Austria, something to do with Achenbach, which gave Achenbach the perfect opportunity to send these mercenaries into Sealand to kidnap, or not kidnap, but imprison Michael Bates. Michael Bates was apparently pouring because they were business partners, and he knew who they were. He let them land on Sealand. They had this little radio mast that they keep propped up in the middle of the helipad that you have to take down anytime a helicopter wants to land. So he does that. Apparently, he was pouring whiskey for these guests when they closed the door behind him and locked him in I think either the kitchen or a bedroom or something. And he'd stayed in this room for 3 days before eventually, for some reason, they let him go and shipped him off to Holland on a fishing boat where he reunited with his family. Now, Roy, not being a man to be trifled with, was not happy about this. And he decided to say, I am taking back Sealand, categorically. And so, what else do you do but hire the helicopter pilot from a couple of the early James Bond films and load up for bear and fly out to Sealand, rappel down the side, and take this thing back. Apparently, Michael had rappelled down the rope. They couldn't land, so they rappelled down rope. It's like the opening of Call of Duty. Like, it's crazy. Michael hit the ground hard, and he got a shotgun on his chest, which apparently went off, nearly hitting himself and his dad. However, this was actually a good thing, because when they heard the shot, as soon as they landed, the guard who was standing, guard on deck, immediately surrendered. He thought, well, I'm not dealing with this. And everyone else surrendered too.
Wait, so the shot, the gunshot was what set them off, and not the giant helicopter?
Apparently not. I don't know when this happened. I think it was I don't know if it was at night. I imagine so. I mean, if you're going to this length, like, surely you're going to do a stealth mission. I did.
How do you do a stealth mission?
I did read that they said that they flew downwind so that the sound would be lessened on the way there. So I guess it was just like a quick ambush.
I do have one quibble.
Okay.
Who's the source for all this information?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's rather kind of aggrandizes the prince himself, these stories.
Well, Roy Bates did write a book called Holding the Fort. I'm also getting this from a book on Sealand I'm pulling it from a variety of sources. I mean, by and large, this is from Roy Bates, yes. And without, pissing off the lawyers too much, it is possible that he might be stretching the truth a little bit. I mean, but
we've never let the truth get in the way of a good story here on History.
But he'd been, the thing is, he'd been telling this stuff for years, right? He had, this is a story that he had basically perfected. If it wasn't true, he had perfected it. I think that there is some stretching the truth, obviously, but I mean, it does tell a good story. And by and large, these are the events that did happen, but there might be a little bit of added heroism, which, we always like to hear.
Can I just ask one thing as well? These people, were they actually living permanently on Sealand?
No, not really. I mean, Sealand itself did have, I think it always had 1 or 2 people living on it. Normally there was a security guard or a handyman, and there still is one today. I think his name is Michael. And he, most of the time they actually, because they did have a house in Essex, and I think most of the time they were living in Essex, but every once in a while, probably every week or so, they would go out to Sealand to make sure that everything was okay. Because, I mean, as you can tell, like, this stuff gets taken over so quickly. Like, somebody needs to stay and make sure that no one's just squatting, or no one else is trying to set up their own, Radio Freedom stroke casino. So, anyway, to get back to the story. And this is the most bizarre thing, probably. They set most of the mercenaries free, except for one, this Gerhard Putz character, who they kept in prison for 2 months. And he was held captive for 2 months until he could pay 75,000 marks, or about 37,500 USD. I don't think that's adjusted for inflation, so that's probably worth a lot more today. Which kind of, I'm not really sure how that works. I mean, you're keeping him there. How's he gonna get that money? But anyway, eventually the German embassy gets involved, and they say the imprisonment of Putz is, in a way, an act of piracy committed on the high sea, but still in front of British territory by British citizens. And it's a bit of an international fiasco here, because the Dutch foreign affairs officer, gets involved. He suggests knocking the fort into the sea, just like, can we do this? No? Oh, okay. And eventually it got so bad that a West German diplomat had to go to Sealand to facilitate Putz's release, which again emboldens Bates into saying, well, we're having a diplomat come here. That
is this de facto recognition.
This is de facto recognition of Sealand as an independent nation. Interestingly enough, Bates was actually represented in court in Holland a year later, or maybe it was 2 years later. It was 1980. This was in 1979, all this kerfluffle. In 1980, Bates wanted to press charges against one of the Dutch mercenaries who had kidnapped his son. And he was actually represented in court by Putz. So take from that what you will. So, here's something else. Alexander Achenbach, this character, obviously, his coup attempt, if as it were, had failed. However, that didn't really deter him, because he had decided to say, I'm going to start the Sealand rebel government, the government in exile. He declared himself the Prime Minister of Sealand, even though he wasn't actually there. He said it was a government in exile, and over many years, apparently they started growing in numbers and in capital, because in 1997, and this is a crazy, in 1997, the man who killed Gianni Versace had taken his own life on a boat which was owned by a man who claimed to be, like, he had Sealand passports, he had Sealand diplomatic plates that he would drive around with. However, this was an issue because Sealand itself had only issued about 300 passports, and they didn't issue one to this guy. Yeah, this guy was running around claiming diplomatic immunity because he was protected under the government of Sealand. There was actually quite a few of these, and something's amiss. Roy Bates and Michael Bates could tell. Turns out what had been happening was possibly run by Alexander Achenbach. We're not 100% sure, but it seems likely. Alexander Achenbach had actually been involved with the Sealand rebel government and had been issuing forged Sealand passports. So a passport that already does not have any international use, like they're just fantasy passports, are being forged.
Surely, no. If you want to forge a passport, forge one that has some
Sealand
has
police
actually
will
some worth.
investigate this.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't want to. We know the methods they use on Sealand, helicopters and
Yeah.
shotguns. You don't want to get in trouble with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did become a bit of a real issue because there were actually, I think that the Sealand rebel government actually did have a website that, and this was 1997, so pretty early internet here. They had a website which claimed that they had sold over like 160,000 passports. That's probably not true. They're probably just making that number up to seem bigger than they actually are. But it was true that they were selling forged passports, and quite a lot of them actually, because they had sold during when Hong Kong was being handed back over to the Chinese. They'd sold apparently like 4,000 passports to Hong Kongers. I guess I also apparently they were arms dealers and drug smugglers using Sealand passports. And yeah, this happened. Also, when the Panama Papers came out, the Sealand rebel government was actually implicated in the Panama Papers. So, there's...
Oh, of course, yeah.
I mean, it's... Yeah, so basically this gets resolved by Sealand recalling all the passports. And pretty much since then, it's been pretty quiet on Sealand. That was in 1997. It's been pretty quiet. I mean, in, I think, 2003, they had a company approach them called Haven Co., which was a web hosting company that wanted to host, well, gambling and pornography and pyramid schemes and a whole bunch of different stuff. And they kind of partnered with Sealand, Sealand wanted to make some money. These guys wanted to have their data safe. And they came up with a whole bunch of ridiculous stuff, like, we're going to have a nitrogen-filled chamber that requires scuba gear to get down into, which means, and that's where we'll keep our servers, so the data will be the most safe data on the planet. However, the issue is that electricity on Sealand is kind of spotty, because I think right now they are literally, I mean, they were running off a generator at that time, the original generator from the 1940s. Fuel shortage was an issue. Nowadays, they're running on battery and solar. But yeah, they broke it off with Haven Co. I mean, and even also here's something. Julian Assange approached the Bates family and asked if WikiLeaks could put some servers there, and they turned them down. But pretty interesting that it happened nonetheless. So yeah, they wanted to turn this place into a bit of a data haven, as opposed to its original kind of ideas as a tax haven. um, but yeah, and now you can you can't really go there without a lot of talking to the Sealand. Yeah, I mean, there's I think maybe 4 people that are really involved in Sealand right now. There's a security guard, and handyman, like I mentioned earlier. There's another one, and then there's the 2 sons. Oh, sorry, no, 5. There's Michael Bates. Michael Bates is still alive. Roy Bates, unfortunately, passed away relatively recently from Alzheimer's, and so did his wife. Not from Alzheimer's, but his wife passed away recently. And now Michael Bates is the patriarch. He runs it, and he has 2 sons, both of which are involved somewhat. But really, now all they it is a pretty tiny thing. They say they have solar panels. They say they want to start mining crypto on Sealand, but by and large, yeah, I mean it's just pretty quiet. It They run a fishing company out of Essex, and that's what they do with their time when they're not on Sealand.
Well, given its history, I think a legitimate and sustainable business like cryptocurrency is exactly the sort of thing that could be run out of Sealand. But yeah, I mean, I think be interesting to know which of our listeners, which one would they would prefer to live on out of our 3 unique,
Well,
isolated and micro
uh,
communities.
no, it's funny you should mention that because the Pitcairn Islands are wanting people to move there because not looking good in terms of the demographics. It's facing possible extinction.
Oh dear.
Um,
Well, there
yeah,
you go.
so
We are raising the kind of
uh,
flag for the Pitcairn Islands.
yeah, well, they've not done the best job of accommodating potential migrants, of which they've had none. Because they're basically offering, in exchange for moving there, no real perks. You basically have to set up your own. You have to build your own house with your own money, and they can't guarantee that you'll get steady work or that you'll indeed be allowed to stay after 2 years.
Oh,
So it's not the most attractive prospect, but unfortunately, it does look like the population is in pretty rapid decline. Um, Nobody who's left the island wants to go back, according to
so it's
surveys.
the opposite of Tristan da Cunha.
Yeah, in a way. They surveyed, well, actually, hundreds of people over time have left the Pitcairn Islands,
Hmm.
and there was a diaspora survey done, which only managed to get in contact with 33 of those hundreds of people. And of those people, only 3 of them expressed any desire to return.
Wow.
Um, so only 33 people were willing to participate in this survey. It sounds like a lot of the people that have moved away from the Pitcairn Islands don't want anything to do with the Pitcairn Islands anymore. Um, Yeah, there's what, like 47 people left there. Projected that by 2045 there may only be three people of working age
Right.
left. It's it's not looking good. So if there's anybody out there who wants to give them a hand and move over there, I mean, granted, you'll have to pay for all expenses and build your own house.
If you like a
Then
challenge,
if you feel like a challenge, you can go to the Pitcairn Islands and you can live there. Um, but I am not entirely sure what you're getting out of that arrangement, other than I guess a slice of paradise.
yeah, yes. So we've
I believe Sealand, do they sell like titles
they
and
do,
things?
they do. I was going to say
So there's a Christmas present we
we
could
we offer
recommend to
They
listeners.
we give our
uh,
listeners some choices here.
I think I believe Sealand also you can enroll in their self-defense forces.
I I th-
Uh,
I think yeah. I don't know if that costs money, but I
don't think
think
it does. I think you just pledge allegiance to Sealand's, monarchy, and um, there's no formal training, and basically, in exchange, they just expect you to, if Sealand ever comes under attack, they expect you to come to its defense. I don't know what exactly that entails. I suppose you have to make your own way there, but I suppose if there's ever a repeat of the mercenary attack, and Sealand's reserve army, made up of ordinary people like you and me, will be expected to leap to its defense.
well,
I think they'll be in for a rude awakening if that ever happens.
Sealand does actually have a football team too. Um,
How?
I mean, it's
Are
it's
they
it's
mercenaries?
kind of yes. I mean, they're football mercenaries because they're all players from other smaller teams from across Europe, and they're not they're obviously not recognized by FIFA, but they're recognized by there's it's like the smaller FIFA, the one that caters to kind of smaller nations that might not have enough clout to to participate in FIFA, and that they've had a few games.
They won
Are
any?
you saying that Sealand is a member of Canifa?
I'm not sure what the organization is.
Because there is an organization called Canifa who did a like a unofficial World Cup with teams that were not recognized, like Northern Cyprus, and things like this.
Well,
Possibly Palestine.
there is a there's a subsection on the Wikipedia article about sports. Um, Sealand is not recognized by any international sporting body. It says here, but there was something I read. Oh, it's an associate member of the Nouvelle Federation Board, which is a football sanctioning body for non-recognized states and states not members of FIFA.
Yeah, that's not even the main one for states
Yeah.
that aren't recognized.
Yeah.
Because Canifa have had like a World Cup.
So they're smaller than. Well, hey, actually, there's been quite a few of these things. Actually, Principality of Sealand is involved in quite a lot of sports. Um, there's this apparently there is a Sealand flag on Everest. Someone hoisted up a flag up there. Uh, they also someone Michael Martel represented the Principality of Sealand in the World Cup of Kung Fu, held in Quebec City.
How well did he do?
I have no idea. It doesn't tell me. Oh no, it does. Martel won 2 silver medals, becoming the first ever Sealand athlete to appear on a world championship podium.
2 silver medals.
So
Wow.
I'm not sure if this is like a thing where it's like you have to be in contact with the Bates family, or if
It
you
would
can
seem
just
so.
declare
Or you
yourself.
can just. I suppose. I suppose. I mean, I suppose it depends situation because raising the Sealand flag on Everest, I don't think you'd need any authorization to do.
No,
In fact,
yeah.
Bates would probably be quite flattered if you did that.
Oh, I imagine so.
Um,
Yeah.
But maybe if you're representing them, in sport, you might need to, because if you're a bit crap, then I don't think Bates is gonna want that kind of negative attention. Maybe he's of the opinion that any publicity is good publicity.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the motto when it came to Sealand. But yeah, like we said, you can purchase titles. I think they start at 30 quid and go upward. So if you want to become like a baron or a baroness of
I buy a
Sealand,
commission in Sealand's armed forces.
yeah, you just buy
I just
become
buy
an
my way
officer.
up to the most senior position, and then just throw a military coup, maybe.
Oh, careful. You don't want to attract the ire of Michael Bates.
I wonder if Sealand, um, if it did establish a proper standing army, I wonder if it would become a security concern.
Well, I mean, I heard something. I mean, not like it never was taken completely seriously by the British authorities, but I did hear something about sometime in the either 60s or 70s, the British government had floated the idea of, if this gets out of hand, then we might have to go in and do something here.
Yeah, MI6's Sealand office were buzzing.
That's the smallest office in MI6 headquarters.
It's one guy at a desk.
Yeah, that's the.
Is it not on one of the other sea forts?
Well, actually, here's an interesting story. I mean, it's a bit of an aside, and I know that this episode is kind of going up there, but we're having fun. The rest of the Monsel Sea forts, with the exception of like one or two, because they're absolutely irreparable, just rusted away. Some of these sea forts have actually been turned into luxury hotels. Actually, I don't think they're the Monsel sea forts particularly, but there are other sea forts in there which have been turned into luxury hotels.
How do you get them?
Boat. You can book a reservation online, and it's quite expensive, but they are nice hotels, all things considered. Like, if you find a picture of one, just type in like, if you want to look it up, just type in like Seafort Hotel, and there's a website that has all of the ones that you can go to. It is really, it does look nice.
Sealand.
They're bigger than Sealand. They're a different type of fort. I don't know. There's a type of name for them, but I'm not sure what they are. Yeah. So some of them have been converted into luxury hotels. So if you want to book a vacation and stay on an old sea fort, which I think would be a pretty interesting, experience. I mean, certainly you're getting some history there. Yeah. So there you go. There's the story of some sea forts. I mean, these things are so interesting to me, just because they're just like these little things off the coast, and they have like a couple different designs. And it's interesting seeing pictures of them when they're, during the war, because they have anti-aircraft guns on top of them and everything. Compare that to now, where they're literally completely red from just being rusted out. It's an interesting thing. Can I make one more mention of a small nation, just an honorable mention here? The Republic of Molossia, which it is run by one guy in Nevada. He's got his own like, I don't know how big it is. Apparently there's 27 people who live there, but it's his family and a couple of other people. And I just want to mention them because I was reminded that of Molossia when I was doing some research for this episode. And the Republic of Molossia features quite heavily in the in the Channel Awesome movie Kick-Assia. If anyone's familiar with that.
Perhaps what they base the premise on?
Yeah, it is. It is. And they went to this place, this little republic, which is not really recognized by anybody. I mean, it's not. It isn't. I'm not say. I said really. It's not. I mean, it's a piece of it's a part of a county in Nevada. It's like 60
Have I ever
miles from
told
Reno.
you about the conversation I got into with somebody about what would happen if a micronation like that became nuclear capable?
Yes, yes, you did.
I don't think we need to go over that right
No,
now.
in fact, I think maybe this is a good point to leave off on. um,
Okay.
so there you go, folks. There's three little interesting historical stories about some of the world's most isolated and sparsely populated, and I mean, Sealand's not an island, Seafort, but
Land is the black sheep of these, I feel, because it's not an island. It's not that isolated.
no, it's only 7 miles off the coast of Essex.
Nobody really lives there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in spite of that, I think it has the most storied history.
Oh, I think the amount of events that take place in such a short amount of time. I mean, no one has ever tried to kidnap the governor of Tristan da Cunha. At least as far as I know.
Yet.
Yeah. Well, if there was some sort of a hostage situation there, it would take weeks potentially for
Yeah.
words to get out.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I mean, they'd have to if they cut off access to the internet cafe, then no one could put out any messages. We don't want to give anybody any ideas. Don't.
Hey, yeah.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody for listening. I know we've been away for a while, but we do want to continue putting out some more episodes, and we will be doing more in the new year. But for now, little fun episode for Christmas. I know it's not particularly holiday themed, but it's fun. So thanks so much for listening. I've been Peter.
And I've been Alex. And thanks for listening to History's Most.